Bye.
Kristen Soward's also known as Seventh Mastery.
Oh, Kristen, this week has been heck for me because I got
That
some of that new distilled, all flavored COVID this week, and
it was
it's been
COVID then for
crazy.
sure.
Yeah, well, that's the current leading theory from the doctor at this point is that it's a new strand of the COVID, and
Yeah, is
it
it
is
testing positive or no?
it is testing inconclusive, which is a
Interesting.
weird test result, but we're going to go with it.
Oddly
Uh,
enough, I know several other people who recently got COVID, although they are testing positive. So
yeah, so yeah, it's not testing normally. It's testing like we think it's COVID. It probably is COVID. The test comes back inconclusive. Not
interesting.
no, but not definitively yes.
So our little friend is poke evolving into something bigger and different. Okay, got it.
And it was, oh my god, like it got to the point where I was literally passing out every couple of hours. So that's why we had to cancel last week. So thank you all for the patience. For those of you who've joined us this week, we super appreciate it. And
Yeah.
we will be talking about much more happy things than that. But
Well,
that means my 3D
some.
printing, that my 3D printing activity has been next to zero, except for that thing directly behind me that you can't or cannot see in frame, which is uh, one of my favorite parts about this hobby is that I also am a photographer.
Okay.
And I love it when I get to 3D print the cool things and then set up the little toys in their little stages and then get the studio lighting over there and then get my camera out and just dial in the ISO and the exposure settings and all that jazz and take really nice looking photos of things that just shouldn't be. Miniature
Are you
photography is awesome.
are you gonna show us?
Oh, can I show you some of this? I
Because I
think I
think I saw something
can.
look pretty awesome. But the good news, while he looks for that file, is I've been printing like a madman.
You've
And
been printing like a madman.
and are you ready? Prepare yourself.
I'm ready. What's up?
I've been printing FDM
No, say it isn't so.
a lot of FDM. So that's been a thing.
Hmm. Yeah, so like getting to set up the little manzas on the terrains and then like setting up little scenes and taking photos of the little scenes. And that's been
Yes, I
super
saw the
fun.
dino one. I saw the dino one, and it made me very happy.
Yeah. And like
Um,
come on, like these are all 3D printed and they look absolutely glorious. Like
yes, that is cool and really good paint jobs. I think the
not my paint
commissioner.
jobs.
Yeah, I know. I think you
This
mentioned
is
that to me.
these all came from Chest of Colors for the
Mm,
ones you're seeing right now.
okay.
And then I've been engaging like Julian and a lot of other painters, and I've also been engaging oh gosh, so many painters, including I'm pulling up their profile so I don't say their name incorrectly.
While you're pulling that up, I just want to say hi to Jade Urchin, Floopy, FND Dragon King, Blasted Samaflange, Lava Being, and Floopy asks, "What's FDM?" That's a filament printing that generally in my previous existences has been mostly reserved for terrain, and I'm not great at
Mm-hmm.
it. But I've been
So,
printing props and cosplay stuff,
oh,
which
fun
is
fact.
really different for me. And it's been a lot of like leveling up some skills with my FDM stuff that I did not know exactly anything about in that direction, and it's been fun.
So the other, our friend Stephen Oakes from previous interviews
Yes,
has
Steven's
painted up a
awesome.
bunch
He's
of
local.
models. Yeah, a bunch of models for some OPR stuff that I've been
Ooh.
involved in, and that has been his models. Actually, I've got a picture of him here.
Oh, nice. I'm
Uh,
curious.
has been part of the photo stage.
Cool.
Yep, yep. So that's been very fun. That's been very fun. And it's like nice that I've, because of 3D printing, that my collection of props has grown exponentially as well. So like having cool little rocks with dragons half hanging out of them, and weird little ritualistic stones, and awesome little huts for people to live in. and and that hut in that picture actually is from Gale Force, not Gale Force 9, Battlefield in the Box. I don't know who
Right?
makes Battlefield in the Box these days, but good
Nor
stuff,
do
good stuff.
I.
Mhm. But
I
lots of
do.
3D printed trees.
I
Mhm,
do often use Battlefield in a
mhm.
Box. I think I've got some crystals that I did for a cave before I
I
started
have that
printing
crystal
the.
set.
Yeah, I actually have it
Mhm.
in purple and green.
I didn't know it
Um,
came in green.
yeah, yeah. It was a follow up set they did for the restock. For some reason, when they did the restock, they did it did no purples anymore. So I
Hmm.
also think there's yellow, but I haven't bought them yet.
Hmm.
Especially now that I'm kind of like, well, this is something I could do with my printer if I wanted. So,
Hmm.
but it
Yeah.
is nice sometimes to just grab the thing. When we talked about that when we were
Right.
talking about when you can't print. So,
Right. But you've been talking about doing FDM printing.
mhm,
We had a question from Flooper that you answered. What's FDM printing? FDM printing stands for fused deposition modeling. It's the kind of 3D printer you picture in your head when you picture of like a little moving needle spitting out plastic.
yeah.
That's FDM printing.
And I think oftentimes it is the default for the average because I think a lot of schools that have taken up STEM and makerspace programs
Hmm.
have used FDM, and so there's a lot more public consciousness of how it works and what those look
Hmm.
like, and it's kind of fun to see like time lapses of them moving around or whatever. Where
Right.
I am actually at heart a goo boy. I like
Hmm.
all the goo, and this one particularly being resin printing because the layer heights are much more discrete and the details higher, but they are somewhat more fragile, and that's one of the differences I've been experiencing, like, is doing so much FDM printing, just knowing like I can just grab the thing and like instantly touch it, instantly mess around with it, tear stuff off of it. Like the biggest worry I have when I'm handling FDM prints is hurting myself as opposed to
Yeah.
making a mess or contaminating my workspace or anything like that. um, Let's see, though. Lava Being specifically asked, how does printing work for small landscape elements that might also be achieved from flocking martini stones? Um, Great if you want them integrated into the model, in my opinion. But there is something to be very, very candid, beautiful, fast, and furious about flocking and styrofoam and just using natural scenic elements. And I would say do whatever's consistent. Like for me, as long as a consistent print, like a bunch of the same type of models, has the same basing treatment or has the same detail treatment, it doesn't matter what I do, right? Like I can,
Hmm.
as it's more like does it match? And even with a little creative painting, I can make all three of those things. Foam work,
Hmm.
printed stuff, and natural elements all look well together if you're careful about your planning and execution.
And I'm a bit of a heathen where sometimes I like to 3D print a cool scenic base and then flock the bottom of it. Like
Flock
you'll
the
paint up the
bottom.
gravestones and then flock the dirt.
Oh, okay, okay. So you're saying like
Mhm.
when you say the bottom, you mean the base. When
Yeah,
I
yeah.
hear bottom, my brain says the underside. I'm like, why would you
Oh,
flock the bottom? I was very confused for a
mhm.
second, but
No.
you
Well,
mean
and
the
often like I will, there's a set of dirt bases I 3D print a lot
uh-huh,
of,
uh-huh.
that I will then put basing material on top of, and I just basically use it as the base dirt texture as the 3D printed base, and then like grass and tufts and stuff get added on top of it like it was any other base. It just saves me the step where you grab the texture paste and smear it over the plastic.
Hmm. I mean,
Mhm.
again, like
Mhm.
that sort of fusion can be really cool. I think. Did you do it on some of
Mhm.
your ghouls?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Remember that.
Mhm.
But yeah, one of the fun things about FDM though for me this
Mhm.
time has been that durability aspect and like knowing because like
Mhm.
I'm the guy. Let's just be honest. Let's call it what it is. I'm so passionate and crazy about my prints that sometimes I'm fussy when I get stuff off. I lose more minis to breaking supports off in a hurry than I ever lose from failed print jobs or whatever. Like
Oh.
I can't tell you how often, like, I print Raging Heroes, sorceress who's like swirling up on mist and her hair's all over the place. And there's a spear
Yeah.
that's like super dangly bits. And like she has like jewelry flowing out of her hair. And like, yeah, I snapped that shit all off because I got impatient. Yeah, that's me. And then I
I've
tried
done
to
it.
use the vibrating curing thing for a while to help soften up all the joins, but it also softens up the structure of the mini and can cause it to break even easier. So that was less than effective for that bit. It did make them very clean though, which I liked.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, like, when it's just printed and it's the best time to remove the supports is
Hmm.
when your mini is its most fragile.
Hmm. And when you're most excited and most likely to make a rash, destructive mistake.
Oh no.
However,
It-
one of the fun things about the FPM is it's not like that. So as I pop it off the plate, and I'm not going to talk about some of it because some of the stuff I'm working on is like gifts for people, but like to have like screw joints, for instance, on FDM prints that screw together like within seconds of coming off the plate, and you can build the thing and it works, and you don't even need glue. That's crazy to me after working in resin almost exclusively for a couple years. Because prior to this, my FDM, I did the one deck box that had sliding
Mhm.
pieces, right? But before that, like otherwise, all my FDM has been large terrain elements like gates
Mhm.
and massive like land structures and maybe like a carved cliff face or whatever. But never really got to enjoy the precise, because we talk about what is it, it's the dimensional accuracy and how
Mhm.
resin can warp, and dimensional accuracy in FDM is really good, and
Yeah.
you can get very precise joins and fits, and that is really fun because like there is something satisfying about like here's these two pieces that were completely like nothing to do with each other, two different colors of filament, and you snap those puppies together, and at first it's like, oh, they're not going to fit, but you can actually just put a little pressure and it works, and they slide and everything snaps together, and you're like, damn, that's satisfying. Right? Like where obviously there's even a tiny bit of resin resistance, and that thing is going to shatter to pieces.
Yeah.
Pieces.
I keep looking for like the best resins and stuff for gaming and stuff, and there's lots of companies coming out with like wargaming resin, and Atlas has been teasing some stuff on their social media where they're throwing stuff
Mhm.
off rooftops and all that jazz. FDM solved that problem a long time ago. Like
Right. Right.
PLA, the most common, cheapest material, it'll stop bullets. Uh,
Yeah. Well, and there's some fun effects. Like, I've been doing some gradient filaments and stuff. Like everybody knows like there's like a rainbow one, right? Or a couple like, kind of prismatic ones. But there's some other really fantastic effects. Like I hadn't seen have you seen the directional ones where like you look at it one direction, it's this color, and you look at it the other direction, it's a different color?
yes, the dual prints, cool stuff. I've been wanting to do some I've been wanting to do some of those dice mugs I've been showing you off in some of those fancy shimmer stuff. Cause like
Mhm.
you get really cool resin effects, and it's a hobby. It's much more friendly for doing those changes, because with resin, if I want to change what resin I'm using, I have to empty the vat completely, clean it out. Then I
Mhm.
have to put the new resin in and then print what I
Mhm.
need to from that. But if I'm not going to print a lot of it, that means I then need to clean it out and then
Mhm.
put the new resin in. And FDM, for the most part, if you're just printing PLA, especially PLA from the same company, like the setting is the setting is the setting, you're done.
Right.
It's real easy. But with resin, just changing from clear blue to smoky black can drastically change the print settings you need to use.
Mhm. Very true,
Yeah.
very true. I like in the cure time and all that stuff. It is kind of fun, like to like I don't do a lot of FDM like filament swaps, but it'd be very easy for me to do and be, I would
Mhm.
say, decently comfortable with the result, right? There might be a
Mhm.
total break if the filaments are not the same brand or whatever, like where there's like maybe a residue or something that builds up on it, but it's still
Mhm.
pretty forgiving.
Mhm.
Matt,
Yeah.
welcome in. One of our
Hey.
first first time visits from a Spotify listener. So thank you, Matt Downer.
You're welcome aboard. If you got any questions, feel free to ask them in chat.
Yep. But I think this is a segue into a topic. Yeah.
When you're looking for what to print, it's when you first get into starting in 3D printing, especially, you're going to pop over to the fun sites and you're going to search for the cool things, and you're going to see hundreds and thousands of models out there to print. And if you're not careful, you can already get yourself into a bad time by picking a bad model to print. Which, because this cool hobby has democratized production in such a way in design, that means that, yes, the cream of the crop, the most talented of the talented, have now been given a way to get their creations effectively and profitably to the masses. It also means that every person at every skill level has that same level of access. And not all of these designs are equal. So I think it's time we should talk about what you should look for. What makes a good model a good model? Like, and I'm not going to even talk about, and what we're not talking about, like, completely opinionated. Like, there's opinions going to come into here a lot.
Sure,
but like,
opinion will be definitely.
We're not even talking about like me saying I want the cute animal people and you saying more tentacles. That we're not talking about that kind of what makes a good model. We're just going to talk about like some basic quality of life issues, so a lot of opinionated stuff, and actually some things to avoid because it's going to make your life more difficult.
Right.
Yeah. And especially if you're about to pony up cash for these models, because like in all things, there is lots of free stuff out there.
Some of which is incredible, by the way.
Yes. But if you're not paying money, you have to dig through a lot more stuff to find that really great stuff. Where on average in the paid space, there's still good and bad stuff out there, but it's easier to find the good stuff in the paid space than it is in the free space.
Yep. I think we could start with that. Like, what I see when I start to see something that I'm interested in and check for, maybe.
Sure.
Is that a good place to start?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so one of the things I will first look at, and it's funny, we've just been talking about this, is the specificity the creator puts on their stuff about material and printer. So, like, when someone says, oh yeah, my stuff prints on every printer without supports, I am immediately suspect. There are people in the industry who can do this. Rocket Peg comes to mind, who has some pretty good track records, and they're very, very clear about whether or not something really can be supportless and how to do it. And there's a big community, and that's a good follow-up. If you're seeing that, like, and you don't know, say maybe like Rocket Pig by name, maybe you look and see if there are community prints. My Mini Factory, Colts, a lot of these places will have a place for someone who has successfully printed and or painted something to post their print. So like you can actually look at not the beautifully produced Creality model that they made in their studio for their whatever with perfect conditions and absolutely dialed in settings, but rather you can look at the community versions and say, okay, yes, you can print that in FDM, but look at the loss of detail. Or you can say, yes, that prints in FDM amazingly, or look, this says both, but every single print is in resin, right? When you start to see things like that, you're starting to go like, okay, yes, I'm sure that's possible, but the reality is this is how it's coming across. This is what we're seeing. And I think the specificity of that is important.
And in general, across the hobby, it appears to be common wisdom has said, if I want miniatures, they're designing for resin. And if I want terrain, they're designing for FDM.
And I would also say
there are people that will cross over.
Yeah.
And they will call out that they've crossed over very explicitly. Like Cast and Play and OPR's New Terrain, explicitly resin first, resin. Rocket Pig and Bright Minis and Fat Dragon Games miniatures miniatures designed specifically to be printed in FDM printers, and
And I would
and
say
that
you have high. Yeah, go ahead.
and when they target those things specifically, and they have a good reputation for it, those are great places to start for trying those technologies out
Mhm.
with those artists.
I would say there are hybrids out there too. I'm going to use a positive with Raging Heroes. They recently, I want to say like a year or so ago, because they've been doing resin stuff for quite some while. Raging Heroes, Heroes Infinite is the name of the sub,
Right.
which is its own site. But they started adding props, and the props and
Mhm.
probably even some of their terrain is clearly meant to be an FDM thing, right?
Mm.
Where most of their minis, I would almost double down and say these are all resin intended minis, right? Like,
Mhm.
and so I think you're going to see that too, where there's an occasional like our props. Loot Studios is a good example to me too. They have a lot of stuff that's props that would be, you know, uh, FDM print versus their minis, which are very, very optimized for resin, I would say. Yeah, but that's a good
Yeah,
example. That building that would easily print in FDM and be very good. Although that looks like sectional resin would work for that one too, which makes me
yeah.
excited. That's a fun set. It makes me want to play Necromunda just looking at it.
The loot, not loot, Raging Heroes this month is like this really nice, awesome looking cyberpunk set with crazy cyber doggies and robo cowboys with machine guns, all the fun things you want.
Yeah, that's actually exciting because I hadn't had a chance to look at it. I still am sub though. That's one of my few standing ones that I haven't ever canceled. So
They do a thing I don't like,
Mhm.
which is you have to email them to cancel your sub, which is
Yeah,
illegal in a lot of places now.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah, but they do great minis. They do great minis. I'm also
Yeah.
sub to them.
Blast Samifledge says, I've done a few sci-fi terrain pieces for FDM or that can be printed in both. Did some barricades that work for resin and FDM. That's cool. And I think that's a nice offer to have, right? Like my biggest worry is there are a lot of folks out there who are still running off of their early FDMs and thinking they're going to get resin quality results if they print like mini minis, like the figures. And I,
Yeah,
I think it's time to just tear the Band-Aid off and say, hey, if you want a really good looking mini for your table, you're probably looking at resin
I
period at the point.
I respect people that print minis and FDM. Okay, like but it's a stunt. It is pushing the machine past the point that it's designed to go,
Right,
and
right.
it's just like I have all kinds of respect for people who can jump motorcycles over canyons. I'm impressed. I'm not going to do it.
Sure.
And the absolute truth, unfortunately, is that it is not possible for an FDM printer at this point, or at least the common commercially available ones, to reach the level of detail of a resin printer. Just the math doesn't work. They're not
Right,
capable of
right,
printing that small of details, period. But
right.
if you dial one in and you have especially if you have a dedicated printer set up for this, like you're saying, this is going to be my mini printer, and it can be a small format bed, like the bamboo small one is probably like a really good candidate for this. Um, and you have a very small needle, and you dial in your settings perfectly, and your mastered tree supports so that you can actually support these minis and get them to come off without breaking to 1,000 pieces. You can do some impressive stuff, and it will take you 10 times as long to pull that same mini off the plate as it takes to print that mini in resin, and you will
Yeah,
never quite be at the right amount of detail as a resin mini. It can be done, but you're asking for heartache.
yeah, yeah. How much larger? Lava Beings, that's the question. How much larger would you like to scale a miniature to ensure good quality in FDM printer? Um, that depends on what you define good quality, because frankly, you could scale it up, Lava Bang, and then sand it and get something really nice. Almost like for instance, I want to say Neo. Is it? Gosh, I'm forgetting the rest of their brand. It's Any Studios, right? NES, or they do they do a manga or anime inspired line of minis. They're fantastic.
Okay.
And I subbed to them for quite some time, but people have started blowing them up to life size. um,
Oh
and
wow.
printing them in FDM and making like these dark elf assassins and other things that are like 6 feet tall. And yeah, you can totally do that, and it's awesome. But then you're sanding it, you're painting it, you're doing all this stuff, and it gets to the point where you're basically printing a really cool support structure for a whole lot of work you're going to do on top of it. And it starts to become a question of like, could you have sculpted this in the same time? And with this many big prints to get your life size thing together, like a life size, like cosplay is different because you're inside that and there's not going to be as much mass. But to actually have a freestanding dark elf assassin like they do, in this particular project I'm thinking of, you could probably get a mannequin and
Mhm.
paint and cosplay it up to the same level of quality in the same. That's the one. Hey, Satan's Panic says Neo Kingdoms, and I do believe that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah,
Mhm. Nice.
yeah.
Let's talk about let's talk about minis. What makes a good 3D printable miniature? Like, what are you looking for there? I can tell
Hmm.
you that one of the first things that I'm looking for at what I consider quote unquote a good 3D printable mini is consistency of texture. Is the very
Interesting.
first thing I look for to like it. It's like the biggest red flag I see as to whether or not this is going to be a professional quality miniature or if it's going to be a more amateurish work. Which what that means is that the quality of the textures across the entire model
Hmm.
are consistent with each other. So there's like consistent density of texture. And I'm not saying like you have like Arc Villain games on one extreme where they just put like so much texture on their minis. It's crazy. Like every single inch of skin, you can see every single fold, every single wrinkle. Like you can see like the blemishes on the chain around their necks. And that's one level of consistency. And then you fly over to Artisan Guild on the other
Hmm.
side of the thing where you have like there's still good amount of texture on the model, but like you're going to have like a whole swaths of an arm will be a smooth texture surrounded by a texture or
Right.
and neither of those things are wrong, but the thing is that it's consistent. I'm not going to have a mini where like the legs and the body are like smooth swaths of thing, and then the vest on it is hyper textured like crazy, and none of this stuff seems to match. It looks like, and this is often the case of how they come about like this, smashed together pieces. And
Right.
when you
Right.
see inconsistent texture, it's often the result of an artist who has taken stock assets and bashed them together into a model, which using stock assets is not a bad thing in and of itself. But
Correct.
anytime you use stock assets in any form of art, it's on you to integrate it into the rest of the art so that it looks consistent. And when things
Yeah.
do not look consistent across the model, big red flag. And it's not just going to be the look that suffers when you do that,
Mm.
but whenever you see that level of work, it means that I'm going to expect that there's going to potentially be gaps. There's going to be potentially be puzzling issues. There's going to be issues about points of contact, and like it's just the media. It's like it's the first visible red flag that this
Hmm.
miniature is going to have problems. And if I
Yeah.
get this miniature and start to tear it down and look at it, I'm going to notice more and more and more and more problems down the road.
Yes. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, want me to go on?
Sure.
I totally get what you're saying with that because I've seen it and there's like weird phantom like join lines, especially in like a more amateurish one, and I get that for
Mhm.
sure. But I'm going to go a totally different direction on this and say the functionality and playability of the mini is one of the first things I look at. Everybody knows I love AVG. I love Arc Villain. I love them. I love them. I love them. I love them. But decorative bases that are 12 times the silhouette of the mini. Good God. No. No, 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 no. Also, whether or not, the verticality and uh, the dimensions of the thing. Like, I have wings that go 12 feet out in every direction, and nobody can actually move their minis near my monster because it's basically got a wall around it. It looks badass as hell, right? But like, yeah, it is dysfunctional. And no matter how amazing, no matter how incredible that mini is, I don't want to print it because it's going to have a bad table presence. It's going to knock
Mhm,
terrain around. It's going to get broken. Um,
mhm,
and that playability thing, your mini's gorgeous, sure, yeah, but please, for
mhm.
God's sake, include an option for a non-decorative base that's just like a frickin' square or circle, please.
With the wings thing, I'm kind Lord of the Print is one that is comes to mind there, where they will do the dragon with the massive wingspan that just looks amazing on a shelf, but like it
Mm-hmm.
all makes it almost impossible to play with. And I kind of do
Mm-hmm.
like that they also include B poses for these models, where it's like, and then this one is the dragon on all fours with the wings tucked in, and so like it fits
Mm-hmm.
mostly on its base, and so they
Yeah,
call it
or
the
rearing up,
playable
rearing
version.
up.
Yeah. So I appreciate, like, if you're and there's nothing wrong with that, but I do appreciate it when an artist thinks about that. Like, you need to think about playability when you're printing these models. And I like the big crazy bases and all that stuff too. But even I want the model to mostly, especially down low where it's likely to interact with other models, to mostly stay on its footprint and not encroach too far into other spaces.
Right, right.
For sure.
We have an
You have a
interjection
fun
question here.
question. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
This is a bit off topic, but I think it's an important question.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Downer says, I've got a question. Blah, blah, blah. Using proper safety procedures like opening windows and not printing while in the room, is printing in the bedroom really that bad? I asked because I don't have any other options. So I'm going to say I'm going to start with the answer you don't want to hear. And then I'm going to talk about ways to mitigate it. And then to also remind you that this is an emerging hobby whose entire safety concerns we do not know the answers to. And we will not know for decades all the answers to
Right.
the safety concerns involved in this emerging hobby.
True.
Yeah. So that is one thing to note. Secondly, the biggest issue for keeping printers in your bedroom is it is a space where you're going to be spending the most time possible
Mm-hmm.
enclosed. It's likely going to be an enclosed space
Mm-hmm.
because bedrooms offer privacy, and so having proper ventilation and stuff like that in that room is going to be difficult. And it's also a space where you're going to be unconscious and unable to react to changes in your environment around you, and you're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with potentially dangerous materials.
Right.
I
Right.
would say it depends drastically on which materials you're using. If you're doing PLA, FDM printing, there's not a lot of toxic stuff involved with that at all, but there is fire safety concerns that you need to keep in
Yep.
mind with heating things up that high. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about resin printing, you're talking about potentially toxic fumes that you're going to be exposing yourself to at an extreme level when you're unable to react to any of this. Like, if you were to have an allergic reaction to that while you were unconscious, you're not going to be able to extract yourself from that environment and take the proper safety materials you need. There are potentially ways you can mitigate this
Mm-hmm.
by putting in, they do make like in window ventilation mounts so that you can like attach a ventilation hose to your printer. You could put it inside of an airtight enclosure and venting all the fumes outside, so that the only times you would be exposed directly to the fumes would be in the situation where you were conscious, and then this whole thing was completely buttoned up while you were unconscious or not dealing with
Mm-hmm.
it. And then you would largely mitigate a lot of those risks. But you're dealing with an extreme situation where I would never want this material in my bedroom, because I never want to be in a situation where I could not react to changes in my situation when health is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And you just can't be asleep and react to a spill. You can't be asleep and react to a rip in your
Mm-hmm.
FEP. You can't be asleep and react to, so you've reached that point where the buildup of toxicity has exceeded your immune threshold, and now you're going to be entering anaphylactic shock. You're not
Right.
going to
Right.
know when that happens until it happens, and you should not be in a situation where you're unconscious, potentially unconscious when it's happening.
Yeah. I'm just going to kind of say a couple things about this too. Most of the things that keep this hobby as safe as possible is limiting exposure and limiting exposure time. And
Mhm.
so this is directly against that. And that's why I would say stuff that I would normally kind of poo-poo the danger
Mhm.
of, I would probably tell you it's much more safe than you think it is. This being a long exposure situation, I'm going to reverse that entire vibe, right? And say probably just don't.
Yeah.
I have
I would
seen a
look in Oh,
okay, go
sorry.
ahead. I've seen a clever exterior enclosure, like almost like how you could get an AC that hangs out your window. I have seen
Mhm.
some AC mods, or not AC, but window mods where the people have like an enclosure outside their room where they literally could like slide down the front of it, and it's basically outside. Now there
Right.
becomes a safety concern for your possessions and your things because someone theoretically could steal it or use it to break into your house. So again, maybe not the best idea, but it's a safer option than with other stuff we're talking about. Um, yeah, but otherwise, I think you're probably going to have to be very circumspect about this
Yeah.
decision, and moreover, because bedrooms also involve things like pets,
Mhm.
things that have much smaller biomass, which means less exposure is more dangerous. Um, and so there. If you have a garage, okay, Matt, you've asked
That's
me
the
follow up.
perfect place to do this.
Yes, and then your only real worry becomes temperature control.
He
Um,
says lives in Florida.
okay, so your temperature
You're in the
control is
prime
not.
That's the perfect
Yeah,
place for it and the
yeah,
greatest temperature. Yeah, just
yeah.
set up a desk down there, open the dang garage door while you're working in the room, and you're golden, my friend.
Okay, Blasted Samouflage is bringing us back to topic with that question. Do you
Mhm.
find there are more creators that don't make things playable? Do you think they are games or just artists?
I think that most creators that are making miniatures for games make miniatures for games, and they consider playability to some degree. It might be, and it's a difference of opinion and stuff. Like some creators are really into this cool scenic bases. Some creators really love super dynamic poses, but for the most part, they're making models designed to be used in games. I think that
Right,
there are some creators that are definitely leaning towards more display pieces, especially as you start to get into the larger miniatures, um, that are less practical for actual use in games and such. Um, but I find that that's probably a specialty of that creator, and you kind of know that going into it,
yeah.
when you sign up for it.
I really appreciate. God, I feel like I'm. This is not sponsored by Raging Heroes and
Mhm,
or Heroes Infinite, but they use the term centerpiece a lot, and to me,
mhm.
that says we are now moving from from a mini to an art piece.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's see. Blessed Samouflage says, I recently had to move, lost basement printing error, try to source enclosures and ventilation tools, but have to print in your living room. Oof, yeah, that's rough or lose your business.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
living room, it kind of sucks because you are going to be active in that space a lot. So at that point, I would be looking for enclosures and ventilation and all that jazz to really reduce exposure and to increase safety. But the key here is you're conscious in your living room. You are able to react to situations, even if you have a much higher exposure level than if it is in a side room or a hobby room or a garage or a workshop. So that is still a possibility place to have the
right,
printer, but you're going to need to increase your safety precautions in an environment like that. Um,
right.
but it's still possible. Really, like bedroom and kitchen are like the two nevers I would put, and that's because bedroom I don't want to ever be unconscious around this stuff, and
Yes.
kitchen because the way that this stuff is its most toxic is if it is ingested, and I
Hmm.
don't want to ever contaminate cooking material. Like any tool that I use in my resin station is become permanent in my brain, that has become permanently tainted and must forever be used in the resin station and never return to
Right.
the kitchen.
Right. Yeah. 100%. Like at that point,
Mhm,
that is a processing tool, and it is no longer. It's like
mhm,
I made sure to get very different colored silicon mats because those are
mhm,
that. The spatulas I got are specifically color coded. This is a resin tool. It is not
mhm,
anything for the kitchen ever
mhm,
again.
mhm.
Yeah, 100%. But it does also kind of bring us back into production. So, what other stuff we're talking about minis? Let's get back to that. we still
Mhm.
have more to cover, I think.
I think another thing to look out for when you're picking minis for 3D printing
Mhm.
is how realistic these proportions are going to be. And I don't mean that realistic versus heroic. I mean,
Mhm.
is this sword going to be so infinitely thin that it breaks the second I look at it?
Mhm.
Um, how many points of contact are on this gigantic freaking mace and this small little waifu figure that is going to be wielding it? Do they
Mhm.
have enough points of contact that this is not going to instantly snap off the second you look at it wrong or drop your
Right.
miniature?
Right.
It's like, how thin are the handles? How secure are the contact points? Like, if you just look at the hands, that'll be a big giveaway too. Is if the hand is like just wrapped around it and you can actually see underneath the fingers and such, it means that they've likely put a model and then like wrap the hands around it artistically.
Mhm.
And that is a very weak connection.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you see the model and the fingers are close together and you can't quite see under them, it's because those fingers are fused to that handle, and
Right.
it's a much more secure connection.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
again,
I
this is
think
another case where like the worst offenders are the people that have like got a cool freaking sword from CG Trader and then slapped it onto an armature and did not or are using assets that are or are artists that are used to designing for video games
yeah.
and not for printing and 3D printing. And those
Mhm.
crossovers, there are certainly skills that cross over, but like in video games, you can get away with like very weird connections of clothing and texture and things can be infinitely thin. And those sorts of things just do not work. And the worst of worst is if somebody has pulled over an actual video game asset,
Oh.
it's just not even worth trying. I pulled
Okay.
like a very old example from Thingiverse, and ooh,
Mhm.
it is. If you can see the polygons on the model, it's usually a gigantic warning sign to stay away from it.
Right. Right.
Mhm. Oof. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm gonna use it kind of to move into another part of what I
Mhm.
look at, because
Mhm.
a lot of what you're talking about for the artist, the sculptor, translates over to kit bashing, and
Mhm.
so I think when I look at a mini, I need to determine what my intention is towards the mini. Am I buying
Mhm.
that because that Artisan Guild mini actually has a badass sword, and I intend to put it on something from 5 years, five releases ago? Or am I buying that because I want to print it as it is? And I will also then contextualize that to say, okay, I am planning on kit bashing, so I do want this,
Mhm.
piecemeal kit. Or no, I want to print that many. And then I'm actually going to look and say, does this artist offer a pre-assembled option? Because
Mhm.
if I'm putting together 15 minis and the squads are like, two melee, one range, one support, one caster, or whatever, and I'm trying to get like an OPR team together or whatever the game is. I do not want to pose every single mini unless I have a vacation that is paid. And I don't have paid vacations anymore. So
Oh no.
uh right now when I take time off, it's literally a negative. And so to take the time to build a mini piece by piece, I have to be really super invested in that mini being exactly that. Um and so yeah, I'm going to want, depending on my time and the scale, if I'm building a player character for D&D, I'm either going to use like one of those customizable builders like a Hero Forge or Eldritch Foundry, or I'm going to put that together literally out of kit bash bits, right? And that's going to be like my thing that I'm spending my character that I'm planning on playing for like 2 years, right? Then I'm going to take that time. If I'm making kill teams or, skirmish fight teams, store bought is fine. Like I want that like pre-set up, pre-posed, slap it on a plate and let's go. Hey, Scott's here. Hi, Comet Lord. Uh,
And
very
let's
excited.
talk
There's that up. Yeah, go ahead. What?
Oh, hey, Comic Lord. Let's talk about that. Leads me into like one of the other things I look forward to, like when I
Uh-huh.
can tell like a high quality model from a low quality model.
Mhm.
posing.
Nice. This will
Indeed, like
segue into my next one too. I'm excited. Go ahead.
when you have a model, and you one of the cool aspects of the artist is to have the model actually pose in a way that both looks natural and or looks interesting and is exciting. And like you don't want your models to be like all stiff like Lego characters with that just doesn't look natural and the toes facing forward and stuff. Like in the ironically, because I'm so involved in the Gundam hobby, like posing your Gundams correctly to display them on the shelf is like a big part of the hobby that like lots of people says like, you know, this is the next skill you need to learn after you learn to build the things is how to put them on the shelf in a way that looks natural. um so that's why I pulled a Gundam graphic on that. But like, you know, setting the stance, making sure that the shoulders are lined up correctly, making sure the arms are spread out, the things just look interesting, and just for an even basic standing there pose is important. And I'm not saying like every model doesn't have to be like completely crazy on their posing, like something from Cobra mode, for example. It doesn't need
Right.
to go like that crazy. But like here's an example of two models from the same model posed two different ways. One's a very simple, like kind of relaxed pose with the sword held out, but even then you can
Mhm.
see that the model has shifted its weight forward with the sword coming out. There's shifted forward on one foot's hanging back to counterbalance that, and it looks really good. And the other one's like a lot more dynamically posed with it flying forward, the wings tucked back, the sword pulled back, leaning into the shield on the charge, with like a cool wavy thing to be a basing element to balance it on. And that's a much more dynamic pose. And both of these poses are actually on the pretty tame side for Cobra mode.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's just I like this model because it's like shows the same model posed in two different ways that are both good posing, where like you actually can
Right.
feel the weight of the model. It doesn't feel like it's a toy sitting on your shelf. It looks like
Mhm.
it could potentially exist in its space, and it implies movement and stuff like that. And good posing is so important to make anything believable on the battlefield, whether it's going to be just a group of spearmen like relaxed leaning on their spears and you can just feel the exhaustion just rolling off of that unit that you put together because they're waiting for the battle to start. And that's some of the most exhausting things of all the way to Lancelot like standing on the back of his horse about to jump off from Heroes Infinite. You know, that's an
Right.
example on the other extreme.
Yeah. Blessed Camouflage throws out someone who's done piecemeal figures and working on some add-ons. I found that legs, heads, torsos are three options, putting some together, but not too much. I actually like that a lot.
Mhm.
Battle Yak also sticks out in my mind as having,
Mhm.
you know, 3 or 4 modular pieces that are like lower body, top body, whatever.
Mhm.
And I really appreciate that because that is not like a whole time crunch. And if you've got good joins and good like gluable connections, printing them in pieces and not even taking the time to do that and just handling it with glue when you're putting it together is much more viable. Building a
Mhm.
20-piece kit printed out that way is both obnoxious to pull off the supports and it just feels like I might as well have taken the time to assemble it because I'm going to spend that much time gluing it and holding it and pinning it, or whatever. Morgan Weirling says, not much of an immersive player. I would argue that having every model in the action pose could be immersion breaking. Sure, yeah, having the add arms pose is very important. And actually, I think it's especially for smaller like creators who give us 3 or 4 poses per mini, that's a lot less workflow intensive to up their mini count. And I think it's
Mhm.
a really good offering to have that kind of like stoic. I mean, Scott's here. Scott sometimes has like an add attention kind of stoic guard pose and then like has the badass I'm coming at you pose. And that
Mhm.
adds intense value to a mini, especially one that like Scott takes a lot of time on his textures, for instance.
Mhm.
And I really appreciate it. So it's nice to see those textures because sometimes, like, depending on your pose, you can just spend all this time making a rad texture and then, like, you move the arm in front of it. So, like, to have another pose where it shows off the big, cool armor texture, it adds more value to me in multiple ways, right?
Mhm.
And this segues really well into my next point is not only the posing, but the paintability of the mini. Um,
Mhm.
because oftentimes you get a mini and like I said, I just mentioned, I love a pre-assembled mini. So it's,
Mhm.
print and go. But if the pre-assembled mini is like arm in front of cool textured breastplate in front of casting effect, and suddenly I've got to get my brush under all that to get at their armor, now I'm regretting that that's all one piece, because now I have to like force my paintbrush up there, and I already have like some issues maintaining a steady hand and a steady brush stroke. So like to
Mhm.
do that while I'm like stuffing it between two limbs and trying not to snap the resin off, like
Mhm.
no, not a happy camper. So there is something to be said about that aspect as well. Can I paint this? And at that point, is it worth printing it in piecemeal so that I can paint it more easily? Um, and sometimes that answer is yes if you want to do a really good paint job. You are looking for a specific example, I think. But going back to Battle
Well,
Yak, for instance,
paintability. Oh, so okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
just I had some times where I went ahead with those separate pieces so that I could
Mhm.
swap it up. And the separate pieces also let you use material swaps. So if I wanted, I did those cosmic horror skitter monsters. I don't know if you remember, and I used translucent red so that like a lot of the tentacles and tongues and stuff were all like this cool see-through red that was really neat. And like you can do things like that with the piecemeal build, which is, you know, another way to like pull that in and benefit from an assembly that it becomes favorable to painting and material swapping. Anyway, I'm rambling. You found your picture, I think.
So paintability is also very subjective to how you paint. For
Sure. Oh yeah.
instance, let's look at the arch villain like games. Like first, arch villains quality of their artistry is like some of the top, like some of the best in the
Yeah. Some of
field.
the absolute best in the industry.
Yeah,
100%
but
agree.
they're also known for like hyper detailed models, like with
Right.
texture on texture on texture on texture. And if you're painting in washes and stuff, that texture just comes out so it's so great. Like, but if you're just like a painter that's like a competition level painter that doesn't touch a wash for to save their life, and you're going to be hand highlighting every single fold and every single inch of texture on this, a model like this becomes a nightmare
Yeah.
to paint. It's going to take hours and hours and hours and hours to sit there and manually highlight those volumes as opposed to using a contrast paint or a wash. But if you're a newer painter, ironically, it's become so much easier and a lot more impressive because that texture is just going to like make the most of those tools and like really show you all this really cool intricate details that would be very hard to paint manually by hand. So
Yeah.
again, like it's completely subjective to the kind of painter you are, not just um, not just paintability is not just a single score that
Right.
you can there's universal bad options too, like so much intricate detail and then shove a giant tower shield in front of it that you've never, like you were talking about, you're never going to get a chance to get in there and paint it. um
Right. Right.
yeah.
No, I
Mhm.
totally agree. We have
Mhm.
some more follow up comments to throw out here, specifically for designers and poses. Can you do another gender or similar pose or weapons? Troy, I'm going to say that is a case by case basis because, for instance, we've seen more and more people who are doing like power armor, things like Space Marines. You can do a lot with just a head, depending,
Yeah.
right? Where depending on something being more form fitting, you're basically doing a whole different model, and so like I appreciate people who are talented enough to add that
Mhm.
aspect to one mini and still get multiple presentations of gender out of it. But that is going to be a case by case situation, at least in my opinion. Perrin, would you agree?
Yeah, yeah, it works. You can absolutely do it, and then indeed fairly broadly as long as you're going into it with that intention going on with it. But
Hmm.
there are certain things that lend itself one way or the other, and it's going to really depend on the team that you're working with and the exact models you're working on. Like sometimes, like um, I can speak for a little bit of experience in OPR where we tried to offer all of our miniatures in several different presentations, male, female, and usually like a helmeted option that's more neutral, the
Yep.
expression. And sometimes that's real easy. It's just a head swap because girl in armor looks just like guy in the same armor in a lot of cases, especially when it's big, bulky armor that's not meant to be gendered.
Mhm.
With that armor specifically. And sometimes we have to sculpt the whole mini twice, just because, like, when you start, like, Necromancer in Thin Thrift needs to be sculpted completely different to have a masculine presenting pose as opposed to a feminine presenting pose.
Yeah. I also think, Troy, since you had this, I'm going to go back to your
Mhm.
brand new comment as well, really quick. It says, do two minis or more, kept finding female duelists when I need males. This isn't just limited to minis. Even in just the
Mhm.
fantasy RPG and sci-fi RPGs as a whole.
Mhm.
A good example, play Final Fantasy 14, and casters often have gear that is feminized because of like societal perceptions, and so like it's really hard to find a caster that looks masculine presenting, even with the same costume designs. Like it can be rough, and so there is a lot of active effort that has to be taken by the artist or designer to counter this. Like, and I think that is a really a sign of a thoughtful, talented artist who is very creative when they can present a whole bundle of that stuff in any medium, but specifically in minis, that kind of hits all that and is still either functional because it gets a lot of work and it can be a ton of minis, or to have a kit that somehow customizes both ways, or in a number of ways presents maybe a more neutral option as well. I think that that's a sign of a really talented creator. Um, Ace throws in another point about magnetizing armor pieces and limbs to add versatility to the same mini, and that is something that can be done by an artist or creator, or you can do yourself post or during your slicing process, or depending on when you do it, and that can
Mhm.
stretch a lot, and you might even be able to use it to add another gender or presentation to your minis the same way. So Blasted Camouflage throws out thinking about minimizing textures to allow more creativity for painters. I do love that. Having a paintable surface for like a cloak or a shield is sometimes really fun. Um,
Mhm.
but I would also have some suggested ideas as well. So like, I don't know if it's like a good example. I was trying to think. There's a mini that has the blank stuff, but then like the blank stuff is clearly this was the shield before we did the detailing in it, and they included that original state, and then they added the textured follow
Mhm.
up, which I thought was a really nice value add. I'm trying to remember who it was who did that, but they had a really cool, like customizable blank shield and then a textured one. So
Mhm. Yeah. There's lots of cool ways to do these things right. And the fact, I think there's more um, ways to do it right than there are to do them wrong. But
mhm.
it's also the ways to do it wrong are very easy and very prominent, and very in the way when it comes across. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, and if you're making textures that are meant to be painted, please understand that paint is liquid and liquid flows. So you need your textures to be sharp and prominent and delineated from each other
and
to make this
and
successful.
corralling the pooling liquids if possible,
Hmm.
or yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, or
Otherwise,
just do slap chop on everything.
yeah, exactly.
All right, I think we're almost
Yeah,
running out of
make your
time.
minis slap chop
Friendly,
accessible, honestly, because that's one has been one of the best accessibility tools in their hobby in a very long time. So,
yeah.
and I mean that with the sculpts too, like things that point tiny thin things that point out in various directions are going to, like, that dry brush is just going to destroy them. So, so
Yep, yep.
yeah, keep that stuff in mind too when you're how you're choosing to paint your miniature comes to effect. If you intend to slap chop it, maybe don't get the dark elf covered in 1,000 arrows, because that's going to be very hard to slap chop with keeping those arrows in place.
Sure.
So
Or
we
depending on how they're set up, maybe easier. But yes.
so we are heading into time. Is there anything you want to shout out to or talk about before we bounce out of here?
Yeah, since Scott's here, I'm just going to say there's pre-sign up for an upcoming campaign for Scott. Scott's probably going to stop by and
Ooh,
talk to us about it during
yeah.
launch, which we're excited about.
Um,
But you can go to Comet Lord's website or their social medias. Facebook is where I think I saw it, and there's a sign up already for notification when it goes live. Looks like there's some really cool stuff Scott's got coming down the pipe. I'm super hyped for it, and I've missed new Comet Lord creations for a while since
Mhm.
that changed, and I'm excited,
Yeah,
very excited.
yeah,
So
yeah. I very much love Comet Lord's material, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of it. There's definitely room for you in the space, and I want to see more of it. Last question we're going to have from Morgan Whirling. It is on the topic of value convenience. Do you think the artist should specifically mention or advertise their models being sculpted for conventional painting and or contrast speed painting? I don't think it's worth it because it's usually just pretty obvious at a glance what models are going to be good for what. Um, I think it's worth keeping that stuff in mind when you're sculpting it, just so
yeah.
that you don't like make a model that is intentionally hard to paint for
Hmm.
any of the techniques. But I don't think that that has yet reached advertising potential. If you've got a
I would,
budget for it, it might be worth having your miniatures painted, and so you can show examples of painted miniatures. Though,
right.
do treat that budget responsibly. Don't overspend when you can't. Getting painters is expensive.
I'm going to throw out one last little bit on that too, which is uh,
Mhm.
gamers are an opinionated lot. If you throw that
Mhm.
out,
Mhm.
um, if you throw that out there, there's going to be someone who tries to do the opposite just to prove you wrong. So just don't open
Yeah.
yourself up to that, and just create and let people experience it. It's like when I do game design stuff. The second I publish something out there, someone immediately says, "I used it to do this thing," and I'm like, "That is so not what I intended." But it's kind of wonderful to see someone take something
Mhm.
that you do and run with it. So
Mhm. All right, everyone. If you want to find some more of our content, you can do so at printyourgames.com. I do know that there was a little bit of a problem with our feed. Thank you for reaching out. We managed to fix that this morning. So we appreciate that. So go check that out. If you want to help us out, the best thing you can do is leaving us a review on Spotify or iTunes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Perram.
I'm Christen Perram, also known as Seventh Mastery, and don't forget to use your screen protector.